Now, Stephen, I know that you've got a speech coming up shortly, haven't you?
Yes, you're absolutely right. I've got a big speech coming up at a place called the Lecture Club. I'm going to be speaking for around an hour, and the title of my speech is called How Going for a Long Walk Changed My Life.
Absolutely fantastic. And the reason why we've got Adam here today was because he happened to walk into the studio, so we thought we'd grab him and not let him go until we get some words of wisdom from you. And I think it's pretty good because we know that Steve's preparing for the biggest speech of his life, and I know that you've delivered numerous speeches. So one week it'll be the biggest speech of your life, and then you've had to do next week another biggest speech of your life. So can I ask you a question?
Sure, absolutely.
If you were Steve, how would you prepare for that biggest speech of his life?
Gosh, I'm all ears for this one.
Wow, brilliant question, David. I think I always start off by looking at who is my audience, who's in my audience, what is the makeup of my audience, because then when I know my audience, I can begin to think about how I'm going to sort of craft that speech and see who I can really truly connect with. So that's the first thing I would look at. The second thing I would do is a speech is important. It's important to decide what your speech is going to actually do. So is it to inspire? Is it to entertain? To persuade? Or to educate? So I'll be thinking around what's my message in that speech. And then the third thing I would do is, okay, what's the most powerful thing of all? I think it is, personal stories. Yeah. How could I craft my speech from my own personal story sort of perspective with those other elements in mind?
That's really good. And I know, Stephen, you're particularly focused around the stories in your speeches.
Absolutely,
I know, particularly as your work as an author. So perhaps you can tell us how you've gone about preparing it. Maybe your top 3 things that you've done to prepare.
Well, funny, it's not too I wouldn't have said it so as eloquently as Adam there, but it's not too dissimilar to those points that he raised. I think what I would highlight within that structure of preparing the story is the bit that I always find more difficult, and maybe it's because I've got a bit of a thick head, it's actually getting the words into my head. I find once they're in there, they tend to stay, but it just takes a long time to get them in there. So really, for a speech which is around 45 minutes with a 15-minute sort of Q&A in there, I've had to break this speech down into different segments. And so whilst there's it's kind of stories within stories, there's stories within the speech, and the people I encountered on this long pilgrimage I went on the Camino de Santiago, and their stories. I've tried to sort of filter it down in terms of this speech has a beginning, a middle, end, and then between the beginning and the middle, and the middle and the end, what are the key points within there?